Hi guys, Jason here. Check out this thing. 1967. Right. JMP. Right. A real proper plexi panel. And check out the back. These cream panel backs, right? This is really interesting. Did a little bit of research on this. This amp belongs to Chris, who's a Melbourne-based guy. I believe he's had this amp for quite some time. This is the oldest amp that I've had in here in the workshop, all right, to look at, right? So I'm pretty excited about it. These white back panels, I understand from research and speaking to a few people that know that this kind of dates the amp in 66, 67, around 67 sometime. I understand that Marshall changed these to gold plexi back panel, same as the front, right? This amp is actually featured in the amparchives.com website. I was looking for information on 66, 67 JMPs, and lo and behold, this actual amp is featured there, serial 2066, right? So Chris bought this amp in for me to do some service work on. We're not modding. What we're doing is restoring, and he's given me some new old stock mustard caps because he believes that the main circuit board in here, or turret board, has over its life, been kind of changed and maintained. And often what happens with an amp of this age is, of course, as caps fail and resistors fail, and over time techs have kind of replaced them with all kinds of stuff, right? So we want to bring this thing back to original vintage spec as far as possible. What we're going to do with this thing is it's already had its tube rectifier taken out, right? So it's solid state rectified, and Chris is not looking for a super lead kind of style amp, right? He's not looking for a cranked super lead Marshall sound. What he prefers is that kind of base spec JTM45 kind of shared cathode style vibe, right? So we're going to look at this in terms of a kind of 1986 model circuit, a 50 watt base spec Marshall. So before we pull it apart and have a look at the insides of this thing, we'll plug it in and kind of see how it's sounding. All right, so let's check out this old 1967 JMP. I'm plugged into obviously the treble channel here, high input, and I've kind of got the plexi set, or the amp set, as I would normally set up a plexi. So I've got my presence at about 6. I've got the bass just back from 5, kind of just back from midday. The middle is up at 3 p.m. Treble is about 1 p.m. I've got the normal channel on 0. So let's bring up the volume on this guy. I'm on the bridge pickup of my gold top here, and let's see what we got. Okay, so the volume there is just at about 9 a.m, right? So, it's on about 2, I guess, something like that. Doesn't sound like there's a bright cap, which is what I'd expect, right? If this is a base spec amp, you wouldn't expect there to be a bright cap on that channel. Might have something small value, but it doesn't sound like it to me. A little bit of break up there, but pretty gentle at that level, isn't it? Doesn't sound terrible. I certainly heard a lot worse straight out of the gate. Let's bring this up a bit, right? So we're now It's kind of about 3, it's about 10 AM, right, on the volume there. So let's have a listen. Starting to kind of get a little bit woolly, and maybe this is what Chris was talking about when he said, you know, it's kind of lacking the clarity that he thought the amp used to have. It's that kind of, you know, it's that breakup that you get with a bass spec amp, but again, it's not terrible. Let me just try up on the neck pickup. Yeah, it's okay, right? This is okay. I'm going to bring this right up to midday. So we're at 5 of 10 on the volume. Back on the bridge pickup here. Malcolm Young, what do you reckon? I don't know. I'm going to bring this up a bit more. 7. Right, that's probably as high as I'll take it in this test. But let's have a listen to how this is going at 7, which is, you know, the amp's cranking at this point, right? Well, I've heard worse, that's for sure. Yeah, so I can kind of see what Chris is going on about there, with a little bit of lack of clarity perhaps, but, you know, it's just sounding pretty cool, right? So we're definitely not going to mod this thing, so the service will all be about restoration, making sure that this thing is set up as it should be, I guess, as close to the original spec as we can, notwithstanding that it is solid state rectified, and when it was first released it would have been tube rectified, I'm sure, but we'll find out when we pull this thing apart. We'll have a good look at the, you know, the spec and see how we can move it forward. All right, so let's take this guy apart. Lay down PT is what we'd expect. The old radio speed is 16 plus 16 microfarad little cap here. Interesting. So this is where the tube rectifier would have been. Yeah. As Chris said, it's been converted to solid state. Yeah, check out these ends of the chassis. You can see that. Once I bring it out, you'll have a good look. These are the kind of aluminum, or aluminium as we say here, block ends on the chassis, which a bit of a pain in the ass to get off and on, but so be it. All right, so let's have a look at this thing. I will show you these ends, right? We'll make sure we do that before this video is done. But there is a mix of a good amount of original stuff in here, but some kind of not so original things going on here with these electrolytics that have been added. So I need to dissect that and find out what the hell's going on. But let's just go down. Actually, let's start down this end, preamp end. Very first observation is, as Chris told me, and I think we could hear it, right, in the sound test I just did, shared cathode. See this yellow wire here, right? This is the cathode for V1A, and you can see the wire there jumps straight across and connects to the cathode on V2B. That's what they call a shared cathode. In a lead spec amp, these won't be bridged, right? And you'll have your own, this guy will have its own yellow, always yellow in the Marshall wiring, yellow wire to its own cathode resistor. And I can see we've got what looks like an 820 ohm resistor there with an electrolytic bypass cap, probably 330 microfarad, something like that. This thing here is a filter cap, and the black, the negative is grounded, and the positive side is to the supply node for V1. Right, there's 200k plate resistors here. So this has got some filtering added to it, which we wouldn't normally see that. We'd normally see a dual cap sitting here. Okay, and this is a single. So, but I will check that, right, because I need to go and have a look at, I'm thinking more about a kind of 70s, lead spec amp. I need to go and check this with respect to what a 67 looked like. It might actually be just one filter cap here for the entire preamp, and so someone's actually added this, try and provide some more filtering down to V1. This guy here is paralleled in with this existing cap, so this is a 32 microfarad cap. I'll measure all these with my LCR meter, but this is just paralleled in to increase the capacitance of this guy, right? So that tells me that either someone was trying to, get a stiffer preamp, or that this was failing or failed, and they didn't want to pull it out. They just wanted to parallel a new one in place. Reasonably good mix of original caps here, right? So these mustards here look, well, they're certainly old. They look original to me. And looking through here, these ceramic caps here look original as well. Can't quite see what's going on under there, but looks like there's a 10k drop-in resistor sitting underneath that red wire. This is unusual. I'm going to reference that. So I would expect a 0.022 and a 0.022, right? Part of the tone stack here. So we'll measure that and find out what's going on there. This is a 250 picofarad treble cap, which is what I'd expect to see. As we saw, or as we heard in the tone test, no bright cap. These pots are all original, bar this one. It's only had one replaced in its life, so that's pretty cool. It's pretty clean, isn't it? All in all, for an amp that's older than I am, just saying something. These orange drops are obviously have been put in, so maybe with the with these mustards, right, that Chris gave me, we can pull these out and put mustards back in, I'll definitely look at this tone stack, right, and make sure that this is kind of back to where we want it to be per a base spec amp. But most of the stuff looks pretty original. We will check what's going on with these. These bias caps here do look old. They might be due to be replaced. We'll suss that out. But pretty clean. All this stuff looks, you know, I think a lot of these resistors, even though these are old, I'm not sure they're original. I'm not sure they're all 1967 spec, but you know, be that as it may, it's a very clean amp. All of this stuff looks really good to me. It certainly hasn't been hacked up by anybody. The old tube rectifier sitting down the side here, and we've got some diodes wired over the top of it. All right, so that's this is the conversion that's been done with respect to converting it to solid state rectified. Original presence cap here looks all cool. This all looks tidy. We've got obviously a filter cap here bolted into the side. It says, oh god, 32 microfarad. Yeah, this was the 16 microfarad that we saw. So I'll kind of need to trace through all these wires and figure out where they're all going and make sure that that filtering is all cool. But you know, it's in pretty good nick, right? It's just not going to be too much of a drama. Not too much of a drama to put back to as original as we possibly can, given the parts that Chris has supplied. While we're here, let me show you these the ends of this thing. Okay, if you haven't seen one of these before, these old chassis, check it out. Right, they're actually bolted in or screwed in, those ends. They're not, you know, in a more modern chassis, well, you know, from the probably late 60s onwards, 68, 69, somewhere around there. They were just bent and welded, you know, like you'd see in any modern amp these days, actually. So that's pretty interesting. All right, let's we'll get probably the LCR meter out now, and the multimeter, and try and trace some of the stuff. So I've had the chance now to kind of examine what's going on here in this old 1967, you know, as it relates to the kind of the filtering and the power amp kind of setup. Look, it's, yeah, interesting, I guess is the way to describe it. This old can cap here, which I reckon is original, this is actually the ground terminal, not connected. Right, now, I don't know whether they were all like that, or whether this has kind of been done aftermarket or what have you, but let me just do, it's obviously grounded, and this is grounded. All right, so it is getting decent ground reference, no worries, right? But only because this is bolted to the chassis. So kind of unusual. Now, let's talk about what's going on down here. So, as I mentioned, it's been converted to a solid state rectifier. So there's diodes in series on this side and diodes in series on this side. And then what we've got is a 15 ohm 5 watt resistor, which is in series with those diodes. And from there, it goes through the standby switch. And from the standby switch, it goes to the mains filter cap, which is this guy here. Now, that 15 ohm resistor there is simulating the sag that you would get from a tube rectifier. Tube rectifiers have internal resistance, and so when there's a decent current draw through the amp, because you've got it cranked up, this is where you get part of the rectifier sag from, right? So whoever did this was kind of, looking to simulate, I guess, the feel of the old tube rectifier, but by doing it in solid state. Now, I'm going to use my LCR meter here, and we're going to have a look at what's going on with these filter caps. So I'm just moving this to farads, right? So I can read the capacitance on this. And with the LCR meter, you can actually choose the frequency, right, that you're using for measurement. I'm using 100 hertz. I'm using 100 hertz because it's twice the mains frequency. So if you're in the US, you'd set this at 120. But, if you have this frequency like, 20,000 kilohertz or whatever, you won't get that reading. These caps are not linear. Okay, so this actually looks all right. That's a dual 16 can cap in parallel. So it's actually reading kind of okay. Yeah. Let me move this to one side of this can cap here. 30. That's okay. This is a 32 by 32. Yeah. So this side is actually okay. Actually, I'm reading this. It's 16 on one and 32 on the other by the look of it. Reading the lettering on the side. So we've got 29 on that side. It's not, not too far off spec at all. And I'll just get this on here. Here's the other side, 16. So that's also, this is okay, this, actually. 32 on one side, 16 on the other. Not bad at all. Moving down here, here's the next capacitor. And I think I mentioned in the intro bit, right, that both of these are actually in parallel with this guy. So this is definitely a JTM45 setup. So, I said you were a little bit unsure as to whether this thing was a 1986 base spec before we opened it up. Definitely more JTM45. And I have spoken with Chris, the owner, and we've decided he's keen, and I certainly recommended it, that we move this thing back to kind of pure JTM45. And he has referenced a video by George Metropolis, which I'll put a link into that video now, where he has a block end JTM45, or a JTM, I think is labeled on the plexi panel. This is a JMP, but for all intents and purposes is probably the same amp. Now, Chris is very keen to have this thing sounding just like George's amp, which is fair enough because it sounds pretty unreal. Now, if I measure the capacitance of the filter caps here, you see we've got 78. Now, I have no idea, whoever did this, I have no idea why, because this is like super stiff filtering in a preamp, like a lot, This is a 32 microfarad cap here, stock, which even then is pretty stiff, right? You'd normally see kind of 16 here, I think. So I will be pulling these out, and then we'll measure this once those guys are out. Now, the only other thing I want to talk about in terms of kind of examining this thing in the form that we got it is what's going on with this thing. This is not this 1K 10 watt, it will be, resistor here, is not part of the stock circuit. And I've traced this through, and I figured out that it's kind of in a weird place. Right, so remember I said this can cap down here is our mains filter. That's there, right? So the same point, mains filter cap. Now, this black wire right here is one side of the choke. which is what you'd expect, right? This brown wire here is this brown wire here. So that's the center tap for the output transformer primary. So that's all cool, right? Before the choke and from the mains filter cap. It's exactly what you'd expect. And then the other side of the choke is here. This other black wire comes back onto the board. And this orange wire here goes to the screen grid of the power tubes. Now, no screen resistors on here. These are EL34s, so I think I will be putting a 1K 5-watt screen resistors on here. I think it's just good practice too. So the screen grid is coming off the other side of the choke, which is cool, right? Save for the fact that, as I said, there's no screen grid resistors there. But then we've got this 1K resistor which sits in between the screen supply and the supply to the phase inverter. So on the other side of this 1K, right, it's connecting. I'll take the beeper off. That's the phase inverter supply node, right, which is cool. And that phase inverter supply is that side of the filter cap, right? So it has 32 microfarad on that side. There you go. And on this side, which is the screen supply node, here's our filter here, right? So obviously, there's connectivity, right? So we've got, let's kind of just retrace the filtering in this amp. We've got 32 microfarad mains. We've got a 16 microfarad screen and a 32 microfarad phase inverter. However, this 1K is out by an order of magnitude. You would normally see 10K, maybe 8.2K sometimes, but all day long, screen node to phase inverter node, 10K dropper. Yeah. And the other 10K dropper is through to the preamp, which is this one here. And you can see we're getting 10K there. And in a JTM45, V2 and V1 are all just off that same filter cap. Okay. So we've got a little bit of work to do here. What we're going to do is we're going to take all the solid state rectification out. We're going to put this back to a GZ34. Going to remove this kind of sag resistor. Okay, and we're going to get rid of that and put a regular value dropping resistor in there. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. I'm going to replace that with a mustard. I'm going to replace all these with a mustard. And I'll probably end up putting 100 picofarad bright cap on here, which is the JTM45 value that was often used. The sound's already sounding pretty good, but I think with these, with some of these changes, it should really start to sing. And just one last thing in this part 1 video is let's measure the voltages, right? So let's have a look here. I've got the amp that's out of standby. Sorry, it's in standby, I should say. I'll just bring the volumes down. And let's measure some voltages, right? So we know that this is our mains voltage right here. 406. Interesting. Bit lower than I was expecting. Yeah. And if we have a look at the pin 3, which is right on the plate. Okay. Interesting. I often measure AC here as well, and the reason I do that, I don't want to see how much ripple is left on the line. That's kind of in the range that's acceptable. So that's kind of telling you how good a job the main filter cap is doing. It's how much kind of ripple is still left on the DC supply. Other side of the choke is here. So this is our screen voltage. So, you know, a bit of a little voltage drop across the choke, which is what you'd expect. At this point, I'd expect the AC voltage to be almost nothing. Yeah, so we're in millivolts now. Right, so that's cool. That means the choke is doing its job. I actually measured this choke. I had to disconnect this wire, and I used my LCR meter. I measured it was measuring 3.2 henries. All right, so that's okay. About the same value as a plexi choke. This is the phase inverter node. Now this is very high, I believe. I've certainly come to the conclusion, the belief, if you like, that the sweet spot for a phase inverter supply in a Marshall is about 330 volts DC. And this is this 1K, right? I still don't understand why someone did that. Maybe someone was thinking, oh, you know, the mains voltage here, the B plus is quite low. You know, it's not 450 or 460. So they wanted to kind of try and get the voltages through the rest of the amp to be high. But too high in my book. It's also might compromise the effectiveness of the B plus dropping network, but you know, so that's another topic altogether. So from the phase inverter node, we're now hitting, so this is the phase inverter here as well, 390, and this is the other side. Now this is the supply for the rest of the entire preamp, 336, right? So I'd rather see 336 here, and this would be in the 200s, you know, maybe 290, something like that, because we've got very high voltages here. Cool. All right. Well, that just, for me, confirms that we are going to change this. Put it back to a 10K. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this intro video, part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll go through this with all of the restoration done. And most importantly, we will see how it sounds.